Saying the phrase, "you triggered me," does not automatically make you right and the other person wrong. We currently live in a unique moment in history where psychological terminology has moved from the clinical consulting room into our living rooms and group chats. Most of us can now name our attachment style, identify a red flag, and speak fluently about trauma responses. On the surface, this looks like a massive leap forward for emotional intelligence. We finally have the language to describe our inner worlds. However, there is a shadow side to this increased literacy. Just because someone knows the words does not mean they are doing the work. In fact, complex psychological concepts are increasingly being used not to deepen connection, but to win arguments, avoid accountability, and control partners. This phenomenon is often called weaponized therapy speak. It occurs when valid clinical terms are stripped of their nuance and used as ammunition in interpersonal conflicts. When a partner uses sophisticated language to label your behavior, it creates an immediate power imbalance. They position themselves as the enlightened expert and you as the unhealed problem. It can leave you feeling confused, defensive, and strangely silenced. You might feel that you are not allowed to disagree because your partner is using words that sound objective and medical. This dynamic shuts down true vulnerability because it turns a relationship difficulty into a diagnosis. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the difference between authentic vulnerability and weaponized language. Authentic vulnerability is about revealing your own internal experience. It involves owning your feelings, your fears, and your limitations. When someone is being authentically vulnerable, they might say something like, "I feel really insecure when we don't speak for a few days, and I am scared you might leave." This statement invites the other person in. It creates a bridge between two people because it is an admission of a human struggle. It does not blame, and it does not label. In contrast, weaponized language is almost always about the other person. It masquerades as vulnerability, but it functions as a judgment. Instead of saying, "I feel insecure," a person using therapy speak might say, "You are being avoidant and it is triggering my abandonment trauma." While this might sound similar, the energy is entirely different. The focus has shifted from their internal feeling to your alleged pathology. By diagnosing you as avoidant, they have subtly seized the moral high ground. The conversation is no longer about their feelings, it is about your character flaws. This is not an invitation for connection, it is a demand for compliance wrapped in academic paper. One of the most common areas where we see this dynamic plays out is in the misuse of the word boundaries. In clinical psychology and healthy relationship dynamics, a boundary is a rule you set for yourself to keep yourself safe. It is about what you will do in response to a certain situation. A healthy boundary sounds like this: "If you continue to yell at me, I will leave the room to protect my peace." The locus of control remains entirely within the person setting the boundary. They are taking responsibility for their own environment and their own reactions. However, in the world of weaponized therapy speak, the concept of boundaries has undergone what psychologists call concept creep. It has expanded to include controlling the behavior of others. You might hear a partner say, "It is my boundary that you do not talk to your ex," or "It is my boundary that you reply to my texts immediately." These are not boundaries. These are rules. These are demands. When someone frames a rule as a boundary, they are attempting to make their controlling behavior sound like an act of self-care. They are implying that if you violate their rule, you are violating their safety, which makes you the aggressor. This distinction is critical because true boundaries grant freedom to both parties. You are free to yell, but I am free to leave. You are free to be messy, but I am free not to live with you. Misused boundaries attempt to restrict the freedom of the other person. If you find yourself feeling suffocated by a partner's boundaries, it is worth asking whether they are actually setting limits for themselves or if they are trying to dictate your behavior to manage their own anxiety. A partner who claims their controlling behavior as a boundary is avoiding the hard work of managing their own insecurity. Another term that has been weaponized to the point of meaninglessness is gaslighting. Gaslighting is a specific, severe form of emotional abuse where one person deliberately manipulates reality to make the other doubt their sanity. It involves hiding objects, denying events that actually occurred, and systematically dismantling a person's trust in their own senses. It is a calculated campaign to erode someone's grip on reality. It is a terrifying and destructive experience for victims. Today, however, the term is frequently thrown around to describe any instance of disagreement. If you remember an argument differently than your partner does, you might be accused of gaslighting them. If you interpret a situation in a way that does not align with their narrative, you are labeled a gaslighter. This is dangerous for two reasons. First, it dilutes the meaning of a very serious term, making it harder for actual victims of abuse to be taken seriously. Second, it makes conflict resolution impossible. In any relationship, two people will inevitably have different perspectives on the same event. Our memories are subjective, colored by our emotions and our past experiences. It is normal and healthy to say, "I remember that differently," or "I did not intend for it to sound that way." When these normal human discrepancies are labeled as abuse, the conversation ends. You cannot negotiate with an abuser. By calling a disagreement gaslighting, the accuser is effectively saying that their version of reality is the only objective truth, and any deviation from it is an act of psychological violence. This is, ironically, a form of manipulation in itself. This dynamic creates a situation where the accused partner begins to walk on eggshells. You might stop sharing your honest perspective because you are afraid of being hit with a label you cannot defend against. You might start to question your own goodness. Am I a narcissist? Am I toxic? Am I an abuser? If you find yourself constantly researching these terms to defend yourself against your partner's diagnoses, you are stuck in a loop of intellectualization that is blocking real intimacy. You are arguing about definitions instead of resolving the hurt feelings underneath. So how do we step out of this trap and return to healthy communication? The goal is to move away from the abstract labels and back to the concrete, messy reality of human emotion. We need to drop the buzzwords and pick up the feelings. A powerful, safe practice to implement is the use of simple, "I feel" statements that describe an emotion, not a judgment. If you are the one tempted to use therapy speak, try to strip the sentence down to its rawest form. Instead of saying, "I feel like you are gaslighting me," try saying, "I feel confused because my memory of yesterday is really different from yours, and I am scared that I am not being heard." Instead of saying, "You are crossing my boundaries," try saying, "I feel overwhelmed when you raise your voice, and I need to take a break." Notice how these statements are harder to argue with. No one can debate your internal feeling of confusion or overwhelm. They can only debate your diagnosis of their behavior. If you are on the receiving end of weaponized language, another effective practice is the definition check. When a partner throws a clinical term at you, pause the conversation and ask them to explain exactly what they mean in plain English. You can say something like, "I hear that you are feeling triggered. Can you tell me specifically what actions I took that led to that feeling?" Or, "When you say I am crossing a boundary, can you explain what specific behavior you need me to stop?" This technique forces the conversation out of the abstract and back into the specific. It often reveals that there is no actual abuse or pathology occurring, just a conflict of needs or preferences. It creates a space where you can address the specific behavior without accepting the label. It also signals that you are willing to engage with their feelings, but you are not willing to accept their diagnosis of your character. It is also important to recognize that sometimes people use this language not out of malice, but out of fear. They might feel that their plain emotions are not enough. They might believe that saying "I am sad" is weak, but saying "I am being re-traumatized" sounds valid and defensible. We have created a culture where we feel we need a doctor's note to justify our basic human needs. We feel we need to cite a trauma response to ask for reassurance. But you do not need a clinical justification to be treated with kindness. You do not need to prove that your partner is a narcissist to deserve respect. Your feelings are valid simply because they exist. You are allowed to be hurt, angry, or exhausted without wrapping those feelings in a diagnosis. When we drop the weaponized language, we are left with two imperfect humans trying to navigate a relationship. It is messier. It feels more vulnerable. It requires more patience than simply labeling the other person as the problem. But it is the only place where real connection can happen. Therapy concepts are wonderful tools for understanding ourselves. They give us a map to navigate our own internal landscapes, but a map is not a weapon. We should use these insights to explain our own hearts, not to colonize the minds of the people we love. The ultimate goal of psychological literacy should be to increase our empathy, not to perfect our defenses. If your vocabulary is growing, but your relationships are becoming more distant and combative, it might be time to put down the dictionary and simply listen.